everybody, and a warm welcome to all of our participants and everybody joining us today. My name is Zoe Van Doren. I work for the Asia desk of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom, and I'm currently sitting in our office in Potsdam. And I'm very happy to welcome everybody here on behalf of the FNF office Berlin-Brandenburg, the Europe, Asia, and the Asia desk. Our topic today is Taiwan, Risks of Engagement, how China puts economic and political pressure on EU countries. As some of you might know, we work as a foundation in various countries with partners worldwide. Currently, we are in over 60 countries and have last year opened our Global Innovation Hub in Taiwan. Our team there focuses on topics such as digital transformation and innovation for democracy. We are very excited to be working there on those topics, as we think that we can learn a lot from Taiwan in those regards. Regarding our topic today and looking at China's economic pressure, Europe may also learn a lot from Taiwan, and therefore I want to especially thank the Taipei Representative Office for their cooperation on this important subject today. We have the pleasure to welcome Professor Xie from the Taipei Representative Office. He is the serving representative of Taiwan to Germany and is sitting in Berlin at the moment. And I'm very happy to welcome him for an opening remark. After this, my wonderful colleague Johanna Hans will take over. She's the desk officer for the European Dialogue and will lead through the discussion today as our moderator. So thank you, Johanna. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over the floor and the screen to Professor Xie. It is an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction. Good day here in Germany and other parts of Europe, and good evening there in Taiwan and Japan, ladies and gentlemen. In my status as a representative of Taiwan in Germany, I'm very much honored and delighted as well to deliver this opening remarks. I would like to begin with my sincere gratitude to the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom and all the speakers for your great efforts to give birth to this virtual conference entitled Taiwan, Risks of Engagement, based on the doubtless assumption that China's aggressive attitude toward Taiwan gives us a good reason to be seriously concerned not only about the future of Taiwan, but also about the security of the world of freedom or our like-minded countries and partners. The thought of some imaginable extreme scenario would just move us to tears and fears. If the world of freedom doesn't send a clear signal to Beijing in time, President Xi Jinping would definitely move heaven and earth to take over Taiwan sooner or later, maybe rather sooner than later. We have to be very careful, because for bad sins, it takes two to tango, but for good sins, it takes five to bingo. If you want to protect East and South China Sea, as well as the whole Indo-Pacific from being controlled by a country like China with such a malicious, expanding ambition and a ruthless regime, you just can't afford losing Taiwan to China. Taiwan risks of engagement. How to deal with China depends on how you understand engagement. Engagement in the meaning of an agreement to marry someone, or the act of beginning to fight someone, or a period of time in the war. As a luckily married husband for longer than 30 years, I wouldn't try to speculate about whether there is a connection between marriage and fight. Instead of Well, once we were Taiwan, we were very close with China, as if we were married with each other, luckily. But now, instead of intimate relation, there's nothing left but intimidation. Today, let's take a glance at what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany posted on their website on September 1st, 2020. The day the Minister of the Foreign Affairs of China, Wang Yi, left Germany for China after his visit in Germany, in Berlin. And it was written like this: shifting geopolitical power structures in the Indo-Pacific also have direct impacts on Germany. The economies of the European and Indo-Pacific regions are closely connected through global supply chains. Major trading routes pass through the Indian Ocean, the South China Sea, and the Pacific. If conflicts in the region adversely affect security and stability there, this has repercussions for Germany too. Again, security and stability 70 years ago, 30 years ago, and 2 years ago. I think I have just pointed out how important the key role that Taiwan can play in the so-called Indo-Pacific Strategic Alliance. That means if the world of freedom, lose Taiwan to China, then the world of freedom is going to be faced a disaster, which is going to affect the economics, the military, and the institutions of every country. So I think the risks of this engagement, we have to be very careful and always on the alert. That would be my opening remarks. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Shi, for your welcoming words that already give us a lot of food for thought to kick us off in this panel discussion today. Before we start the panel, perhaps let me use some time to address some housekeeping issues for our audience that is with us today. And I'd like to draw your attention to the question feature of the WebEx app. So if you look in your right-hand corner, you see 3 dots, and then if you click on it, there will be a window opening that says question and answer, and you can post your questions to our panelists in here, and we devoted some time at the end of today's event to hopefully get back to all of your questions and answer them all. So now let me turn to our panel and our esteemed panelists today. We are delighted to have Petras Austrevicius with us today, who is a member of the European Parliament, where he has been representing Lithuania since 2014. He is a founding member of the ALDE Member Party Liberal Movement in Lithuania and currently serves as the Vice President of the European Parliament Renew Europe Group. Welcome, Mr. Austrevicius. I'm also very delighted to welcome Dr. Kathy Chen to today's panel discussion. She's actually joining us from Taiwan, so thanks a lot for staying up so late to join us. Dr. Chen is the Vice President of the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. She specializes on comparative politics, democratization, international relations, and political philosophy. Also, warm welcome to you. And last but not least, we have the pleasure to introduce Ms. Aya Adachi from the renowned Mercator Institute for China Studies, short MERICS. Ms. Adachi conducts research on foreign economic policy and free trade agreements of China and Japan, as well as trade relations in East Asia. Hello, also Ms. Adachi, to this panel. So without further ado, let's dive into today's discussion titled, as we have heard already, Taiwan Risks of Engagement, How China Puts Economic and Political Pressure on EU Countries. Why are we even talking about this? What has happened that we address this today? We have to go to last year in November, when Lithuania allowed Taiwan to open a representation in its capital. This, as such, is not a big news. A lot of countries have representations of Taiwan in their country. However, what was new was that Lithuania named the representation the Representative Office of Taiwan instead of Taipei, as many other countries do, which then angered China, which sees Taiwan as its own territory. And the answer by China also followed promptly. The diplomatic ties with Lithuania were downgraded. Lithuania was unlisted from the Chinese customs system, which was thereby de facto blocking trade with the country. And it also appears that these customer restrictions apply to EU shipments containing Lithuanian goods and products containing Lithuanian components. Thereby, it's also affecting the EU trade bloc as a whole. It also appears that China has told multinationals to stop buying Lithuanian goods. So already from these examples, you see that this conflict is not just an issue of one single country having a dispute with another, but it actually has a much wider dimension. And we would like to unravel this a little bit today in our discussion. So perhaps let me start by asking you, Mr. Austrovicius, as you are a Lithuanian and a member of the European Parliament, why Lithuania? Why is a country of merely 3 million people leading this European values-based politics towards recognizing a democracy?
Thank you, Johanna. Thank you for starting this discussion, and thank you indeed for Naumann Foundation, which is interested in this issue. It doesn't matter how many population we have. Even 1 million country has the right, to make democratic decisions. It's not size matters. If size matters, so then China should be given absolutely even double membership in Security Council of the United Nations. But we're not about size. We're not about, kind of historical ties or interpretations. Let's be facts-based. And our story with the recent developments in relations with China probably is, it should be presented from two parts. Firstly, we closely follow and we are concerned, for good reason, about the security consequences of some Chinese technologies to be exported to Europe. Lithuanian government made it very clear in the beginning of last year that Huawei will be not allowed to develop 5G technology in Lithuania, at least. Do you think they liked it? No. Secondly, we reviewed our participation in One Belt, One Road project, which in Europe has a connotation of 17+1. And we said that, okay, we want to be on EU side, not on kind of 17 or 18 or 16. And we said, no, we're not going to join meetings with one. We want to be on the side of the European Union. Do you think China liked it? No. But to my understanding, those economic interests and the decisions taken by the Lithuanian government were taken by the Chinese authorities as a kind of challenge. And then finally, in November, the government made a decision to establish Taiwanese representative office. That's the full name, Taiwanese representative office in Vilnius, which I, Johanna, disagree that this is de facto embassy. No. It was clearly explained, given in documents, economic, cultural ties, people-to-people contacts. That is about the Taiwanese representative office, as it was Taiwan's side's request as well. It's nothing to do with diplomacy. Economic diplomacy, yes, but who doesn't do economic diplomacy? And I believe, this opening of the Taiwanese representative office in Vilnius, it's for increasing stability in Southeast Asia as well as in Europe. More trade, more cooperation, more projects, and so on and so forth. But Beijing didn't like it. Beijing didn't like it for maybe more reasons than we know. Exactly. And I have to admit, by opening this office, by extending cooperation with Taiwan, we made it clear. We respect democratic community level. So we respect Taiwanese democratic structures. We want to operate even on that level, and this is very serious. And we should be, naive that Beijing likes that. And probably, I mean, the most serious issue is the consequences. Of course, I mean, diplomatic ties are downgraded, rightly so, but we have withdrew our diplomatic staff from Beijing because of security considerations. And again, it was on the demand from Beijing. It wasn't our choice. I mean, we are, eager to continue with the People's Republic of China, all kind of cooperation, but they don't like it. And of course, they imposed a lot of economic restrictions. Just as of today, the news is that China forbids export of Lithuanian beef to the Chinese market. One more example of coercive, discriminatory trade relations with the European Union.
Thank you for.
And finally, one point, Johanna, in this regard, I think we have to understand how much China has changed, from inside, and how much the Chinese policy outwards is different we have seen before. And looking at the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of China, I think we will hear something else, which will convince us finally, probably, to take all those changes very, very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and also thank you for putting it into perspective. And you already mentioned several times that, of course, with all the actions that Lithuania, even before this, have taken, of course, the reaction by Beijing was always, as you say, they didn't like it. The problem are the consequences. And in this regard, it would be interesting to me to perhaps hear from you, Dr. Chen, because you are, of course, also a prime example of having to endure political and economic pressure by China. How is Taiwan dealing with this economic coercion? And is there anything that we as Europeans perhaps can learn from you of how to deal with it?
Thank you so much for the question. The coercion that Taiwan is under, it's not only economic, but also political on a daily basis. What China has been doing to Taiwan is not only trying to threaten Taiwan's economic well-being, but also trying to limit Taiwan's international space in all the international organization of all the UN-affiliated organizations. I think what we are seeing increasingly is that China's authoritarian influence has really stepped up in the past few years, and especially after 2016, after President Tsai Ing-wen was elected. And what we're seeing on a daily basis is a composition of economic threats, political threats, and of course, military threats. As you guys might already know, in the past year, Taiwan actually endured an unprecedented number of intrusion in our ADIZ. For example, in last October, in the first 5 days of October, Taiwan has really experienced more than 50 PLA aircrafts intruding into Taiwan's ADIZ. So this is, I don't want to say this is what Taiwanese has gotten used to. On the ground here, we really see Taiwanese carry on with their daily lives. You don't see people really freaking out on the street of what's happening, but the threat is really real to the Taiwanese. Everybody kept this kind of aggressive stance and treatment of Taiwan in the back of their mind. But Taiwanese, as general, they do trying to carry on with their lives. And this year is a local election year for Taiwan. So every few years, Taiwan has national and local elections, and we experience the kind of information manipulation or disinformation campaign. against Taiwanese politicians, against politicians that of not Beijing's favorite or of their liking, as our Lithuanian parliamentarian friend mentioned before. When something China does not like, there is an action trying to either provoke or threaten. And what we have been experiencing in Taiwan is that the kind of authoritarian influence that I think democracies around the world have been experiencing. Also, democracies in Central and Eastern European countries have been experiencing under the authoritarian regime, is that there is an attempt to trying to divide our citizens, trying to polarize our civil societies, trying to install mistrust and distrust of our democratic elected government officials, trying to paint democracy or democratic institution as unreliable, especially under the current situation with the pandemic. Authoritarian regimes such as one in China governed by the CCP, they trying to paint the pictures that democracies are not effective when it comes to dealing with international crises such as the pandemic, and then offering a resolve or resolution of a more authoritarian kind of governance as part of the solution. So this is what not only the Taiwanese, but I think democracies in the world have been experiencing. And unfortunately, in the past decade or so, we have been experiencing democratic backsliding, not only in our region in Asia, but around the world. But at the same time, what Taiwan could really offer to our democratic friends around the world is to share our experience in combating, for example, information manipulation campaign. Taiwan has a very vibrant civil society. Whenever they feel that democracy is under threat in Taiwan, civil society members and Taiwanese citizens will come together and try to develop plans and also methods and strategize to trying to assist in safeguarding Taiwan's democracy. I'll end with one example. Organizations in Taiwan, such as the Taiwanese Fact Check Center, Doublethink Lab, Information Operation Research Group, these are all civil society organizations and also COFACs that they come together and conduct research and fact checks for citizens, and they use social medias and chat groups to trying to explain and clarify misinformation and disinformation, so citizens can have better media literacy and also the correct information, so they don't believe in the fake information or misinformation that's, for the most part, being sent by the authoritarian regime across the strait. So I'll stop here and then listen to other colleagues' answers.
Yes, thank you very much. And I also agree with you that definitely your way of fighting disinformation is something that we can definitely learn from. And strengthening, of course, media literacy is also what like liberals like the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation is also focusing on. Ms. Adachi, I also like to bring you in here because in your work, you are looking at specific countries and how they are dealing with Chinese coercion. In your research, have you like come across some best practices, let's say, of how countries can deal or counteract it?
Thank you for inviting me to speak today, and thank you for your question. I agree with what Katie has said about the new reality that we have to deal with economic coercion now. And I think given the new German coalition agreement, which contains a more robust and critical position vis-à-vis China, in addition to the EU's tone that has shifted in the past few years, the perception of China has changed, and this is going to influence the way Germany and the EU engages with China. And with more criticism, this could potentially trigger more cases targeting European countries and the EU. And Germany and German and European companies could end up in the crosshairs of those political conflicts. And this is the new reality of a broader trend of a patchworked globalization in which economic security and geopolitics shape integration. So what does it mean for companies and policymakers? You should fasten your seat belts because it's going to be a bumpy ride ahead of us. So this does not mean that we need to panic. It means that we have to do our homework and study what's going on. So from a company's perspective, there's little control what sectors or what company would be threatened by a government critical position on China. And the bad news is that there are no quick fixes or cost-free solutions. Cases vary depending in the form of coercion and measures that could perhaps be taken, such as diversification strategies or government subsidies to support sectors that have been targeted are going to be costly. But we need to study these patterns in which coercions have taken place. And often they involve around Taiwan, but other triggers have also been observed involving territorial disputes, but also criticism, 5G, Huawei, and COVID investigation. So they're not strictly just about involving China's sovereignty, but also other forms of criticisms have also triggered economic coercion. So we need to be aware of that. But we also, when we study the cases, we also observe that China's bark has been louder than its actual bite. What does this mean? A range of consumer goods from Canada, Australia, and Korea have found other export markets and have flourished. And also what's happening in East Asia is that Hong Kongers and Japanese consumers are purchasing Taiwanese pineapples in solidarity of what has been happening. And I think we could probably learn from that as well in Europe. Another thing that we should note is that China usually targets items for which it has alternative substitutes, or it can domestically, or items that it can import from other countries. So we need to be careful not to overestimate the threat that that Beijing is issuing. So up until now, Beijing has not targeted high value added products because it simply relies on them, and China is depending on industrial countries, and we should keep that in mind because there's a lot of talk about how we in Germany and Europe are depending on China, but China also depends on the rest of the world. So what Europe has started to do is ramp up its tools of economic security, such as the anti-coercion instrument, but it could take a while to coordinate the implementation of those policies. And other ways of dealing with the situation, such as filing the case with the WTO, will take a lot of time. So what the Lithuanian case has shown is that the EU currently is not well equipped to deal with economic coercion, and we should study patterns, and in the medium term adopt some lessons from Taiwan and East Asia.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Back to you.
Yeah, that was very, very rich. I noted down, be aware, study patterns, diversify markets, and also show solidarity with the countries that are targeted. You also mentioned the WTO proceedings that are ongoing now, where the EU has brought it to the attention of the WTO, and also the anti-coercion instrument of the EU that, where you rightly mentioned, it may take time until it actually can be functioning. Those two things are, let's say, like rather technocratic solutions, though, and there are also a lot of calls for actually a wider strategic adjustment that the EU has to take with regards to China. It was also echoed by the High Representative Josep Borrell, that said Europeans need to create a common strategic culture. That's why perhaps my next question goes to you, Mr. Austrovicius. Does the EU have a common strategy on China?
I think the European Union tries to build and update its strategy on China. What it had about China before, it probably doesn't matter anymore. I mean, China has changed tremendously, and we have to, update our understanding about the China's global role, economy, geopolitical influences on the region and globally, and have something better built. This attempt, to approve in such a hasty way investments agreement with China, I think it was a mistake. Short-sighted strategy based on some member states' interests, mainly not respecting probably level playing field principle, which is mostly disadvantages for the European companies operating on the Chinese market. I think there are many kind of critical remarks which might be made public in this regard. But I hope that the European Union will come back to this issue, and we have to react to the situation, a new situation emerged in Hong Kong. So we have to be more vocal on human rights and domestic situation in China when it comes to Uyghurs and forced labor. And we have no privilege, no kind of comfort. To be silent, seeing those things. Otherwise, we will disappear as a union of values. This is something what should be rightly understood. And finally, I hope that this case of coercive economic policy against Lithuania will really push the European structures to approve as soon as possible. And I hope within the French presidency, as we have it on agenda, this instrument fighting coercive policies against the European Union. And it extends not just to China. We have other examples which are not necessarily good for us, to see as being continued, unfortunately. So that's why I think we have to understand how much China has changed and to what direction it goes, and probably react as well. To some alliances China is building every time, as for example, I would be very serious listening to the final, a recent agreement between Putin and he on kind of no NATO expansion policy line and so on and so forth. It's something what China tries to impose on the European continent, which is completely unacceptable.
Yeah, and at the beginning you also mentioned the comprehensive agreement on investment, and I want to touch up on this or pick it a little bit more on this topic. And Ms. Adachi, you were actually researching free trade agreements that the People's Republic of China is concluding. Perhaps you could bring us a little bit up to speed. Where do we stand on the comprehensive agreement, and especially with a look now towards the recent conflict? Perhaps you can say what has happened in the meantime since it was agreed at the end of 2020, as Mr. Ostrovicius said, was quite rushed. But also, what do you expect it to go in what direction, considering the recent row with Lithuania and China?
I think it's been put on hold as of for now, and I think it's the right decision to I support that decision personally, but I also think the general strategy has to be reassessed because on the one hand, the EU has now adopted an Indo-Pacific strategy, a grand strategy to diversify and promote diversification. And I think to have, if the comprehensive agreement on investment is too soon ratified, it shows that there's a serious contradiction in that grand strategy. It needs to first promote free trade agreements with other countries in the region. It has signed a few, but could do a lot better and should consider joining the CPTPP. It might make things more efficient rather than having to negotiate several bilateral trade agreements, which are taking a lot of time. And it's quite frankly, still astonishing that the EU has now managed to sign and negotiate, finalize agreements with New Zealand and Australia. And that kind of signal would be, I think, a lot of it would be valuable to countries in the region, because that way they would take the Indo-Pacific strategy more seriously. If the EU starts off with the Kai, it's a wrong message that it would send.
Yeah. Dr. Chen, I also want to bring you in here because knowing the pressure that China puts on states supporting Taiwan, how do you engage with countries, and perhaps what could you as Taiwan do to perhaps cushion the effects? So how do you lobby for more international support, knowing that, as we have heard from Ms. Adachi, that this is the pattern of Chinese coercion following from supporting Taiwan?
Well, on the Taiwan side, in the past 2 years, especially last year, I would say that the cooperation between Taiwan and the EU has increased. I would say that it's a year of increasing cooperation between Taiwan and the European Union. In the New Year address to the nation, Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen, she specifically mentioned that the Taiwanese administration will very soon put forward a plan to strengthen Taiwan's tie with Europe. That includes economic ties, people-to-people exchanges, culture exchanges, and different aspects, and also providing assistance where Taiwan can for economic recovery in Europe due to the pandemic. So, as many of you have already mentioned, that last September, the European Union included Taiwan explicitly in the joint communication of strategy for the cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And, it pledges the strengthened cooperation with Taiwan in some of the key industries, such as the semiconductor industries, information, communication, technology and data protection industries. And last October, Taiwanese high-ranking officials, for example, Foreign Minister Joseph Wu, traveled to several European countries. And while Minister Wu was in Europe, Taiwan's National Development Council Minister Gong Mingxin also led a trade delegation to Central and Eastern Europe countries to explore investment and partnership opportunities. And also last year, Taiwan held an EU-Taiwan supply chain forum, which Taiwan side and the European Union states engage in discussions of restructuring secure supply chains. There were talk about cooperation in green energy, digital economy, that focused on EU's economic plan. And the Taiwanese administration had pledged that wherever the European Union needs assistance, Taiwan stands ready and is capable of helping. So, on the Taiwan side, there is definitely an effort to strengthen economic relationship and all the other relationship with the European Union. I think the last point I want to make here is that the case of Lithuania is something that we really need to be aware of. If China could intimidate and be aggressive towards Lithuania because of a diplomatic decision by a sovereign democratic nation and trying to use other democratic nations in the European Union to disengage part of another democratic country in Europe. I think this sets, you cannot have the case of Lithuania sets precedent to let the authoritarian regime get away with intimidating one country and pinning other democracies against one. So this is something that I think countries and also especially democracies need to really pay attention to and not allow the intimidation from authoritarian regimes of democracies to continue.
Yeah, and I actually do think that this recent case was an eye-opener for many. Mr. Austrevicius, you already said so at the beginning that Lithuania has already before this last conflict actually left this 17+1 initiative. For our audience, it is a cooperation initiative between China and mostly Eastern and Central European countries to promote the Belt and Road Initiative on infrastructure projects, trade, etc. Could you perhaps tell us again what were the reasonings for Lithuania leaving, and even more interestingly, do you see other European countries following the Lithuanian example in the future and leaving this initiative?
Right. I wouldn't call it as a conflict. It's simply not in our interest to be segregated in the European Union. I think some member states were expressing continuous worries and disagreement as some member states and non-member states in Europe had this cooperation council with China. What for? I mean, if China wants to have relations with the European Union, I mean, on infrastructure, which is important, I completely agree for trade and infrastructure development, it should go and talk to the European Union, plus maybe, okay? But, I mean, those autocratic countries, they don't like the European Union. They want to split and to talk individually. We see it from Moscow, from Beijing, absolutely same application of this principle. Afraid to talk to big and powerful European Union, and they better talk to some individual member states. And we said, right, I mean, we got very little back from this cooperation, by the way, so-called 17+1, not much. And our message was, I mean, let's be back on cooperational platform built on different, configuration. I think for China, it's a challenge. official Beijing is very sensitive to anything which goes not according to the CCP approved lines. Let's be frank. But it's nothing against the cooperation on infrastructure. We are ready and we are interested in this, but let's have something more. And I don't know. I mean, how many countries might follow? Maybe they have to be asked individually. Poland, Latvia, Hungary. I mean, do they see an extra value? But it's a very individual decision. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely will be interesting to monitor this development of how this initiative will develop in the future. I also wanted to touch up on the question of what do we make from this recent role, if you like, for actually a larger engagement or the future engagement with Taiwan. Like, what will follow from that? Will we actually see more cooperation with the democratic island, or rather less, due to fear of retaliation by China? And I wanted to actually ask you, Mr. Ostrovicius, because you were part of the delegation of the European Parliament that did the first official delegation visit to Taiwan last year. And you and your colleagues in the European Parliament, you have written a report where you actually called for more or increased official exchanges. What forms do you see these exchanges taking?
It's a very good point. I mean, and really, it was I would call a historical and very important visit to Taiwan of the committee, a special committee on disinformation and foreign interference. And probably Taiwan is a very special place where you can learn a lot of this interference and propaganda and disinformation coming from continental China. So Taiwanese developed such a practice and such a kind of deterrence procedures and culture that we Europeans, we are still well behind. I mean, what happens in Europe probably on weekly basis, it's 10 times more on daily basis in Taiwan. So that's why it was very important, I mean, to meet all the high officials in charge of this policy in Taiwan. And I mean, it's very important, I mean, to exchange, to cooperate. Not to mention cybersecurity, which is our common, by the way, concern growingly. And I'm looking forward as our visit probably pave the way, I mean, for more possible cooperation and interlinkage, even inviting the Taiwanese officials to come to the European Union and approach us and to, give very good examples from first hands what can be done, because it was rightly and many times mentioned, democracies have to cooperate much more. We have to be very serious, understanding what kind of risks we are facing every day from propaganda, from cybersecurity, and all hybrid threats which are, initiated not by us but imposed on us. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's probably that Dr. Chen is happy to hear this, that this increased cooperation is already in the minds of the Europeans. Dr. Chen, I'd also like to ask you perhaps a rather critical question, but don't take it the wrong way. In the report of the delegation visit that we just mentioned, it also states that, of course, it is the first the most object, or the aim is actually to safeguard the status quo, meaning to balance the right of self-determination with China's one China policy and the one country, two systems rhetoric. Critics are now saying that by opening the representation under the name of Taiwan, Taiwan would allegedly change the status quo. What would you respond to them?
I think the side that consistently changed the status quo, cross-strait status quo, is actually not Taiwan, but the People's Republic of China. When it comes to talking with Taiwan, There was engagement before, but then after the election of President Tsai Ing-wen in 2016, the communication stopped because President Tsai Ing-wen had specifically said that the people of Taiwan will not accept the one country, two system, or the so-called 1992 consensus, that there is only one China, but just two different interpretations. So, you know, the People's Republic of China really continue to move the goalposts further and further into trying to annex Taiwan as part of its territory. But at the same time, the Taiwanese administration really has continued to extend olive branch, the willing for open conversation about discussing how we could move forward in the cross-strait relations, but met with, if the people of Taiwan does not accept the 1992 consensus, which in the speech by President Xi to the Taiwanese compatriot in 2020, redefined the concept or the future of Taiwan being under the framework of one country, two system. And he did not relinquish using military to annex Taiwan. So moving the goalposts yet again for cross-strait relations and for the Taiwanese. And of course, when it comes to not living under a democratic system or their democratic way of life being intruded on, the Taiwanese, of course, will not agree with such proposal. You know, at the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, we conduct surveys twice a year. And one of the surveys that we conduct every year is Taiwanese people's perspectives and feelings towards democracy. So with the surveys that we conducted last year in 2021, nearly 75 to 80% of the Taiwanese that we polled, they agree with the statement that even though democracies has its downsides or it's not perfect, it is still the best government to live under. And more than half of the Taiwanese that we polled feels positive about its democratic future. And further, when we ask them if they are willing to fight for Taiwan's democratic way of life, if the People's Republic would intrude, 72% of the Taiwanese actually said that they would defend Taiwan's democratic way of life. So Taiwan really has a very strong support of the democratic system. And of course, engagement with democratic allies and democracies, not only in our regions, but around the world, it's something that is really supported by the Taiwanese population. And, you know, one thing that I want to mention about the One China policy, I think we really need to be clear and trying to understand what each country's One China policy is. For example, the United States One China policy, it only stated that the United States acknowledges that the China's position that Taiwan is part of China. It does not endorse what the People's Republic of China claims as its One China principle, that Taiwan is somehow historically an inalienable part of China. This is not what countries around the world acknowledges. So you know, when the authority in Beijing throws out One China principle, One China policy, I think those of us who are listening needs to really be sure to try to understand what One China policy is. If it is, you know, an acknowledgement or for the most part, the One China policy of democratic countries does not really agree with the CCP's position that Taiwan is part of China.
Yeah, thank you very much for clarifying it, and also for giving us an impression of how much the democratic structures mean to Taiwanese people, and why it's therefore so important for them to forge alliances with other democracies. And that's actually also a good keyword for you, Ms. Adachi, as you are looking at several countries and how they're behaving and dealing with China. do you see that there could be a possibility of a more multilateral response to China, let's say between the EU and other democracies? If so, what could be the main areas perhaps of cooperation?
I think there are some things shuffling in the background right now with regards to a cooperating on this issue, and perhaps I would hope that the Lithuania case would be an opportunity to change the ways in which the EU approaches economic coercion. I'm afraid that there's a lack of awareness and a lacking mindset right now. I think that the solidarity is lacking within the EU, and I wish that it would be different. And this case has shown once again that there's a lot of fear around engaging with Taiwan based on the expectation that it will anger China. But what we need to be aware of, and we need to promote this awareness that China has not only used economic coercion to threat countries away from recognizing Taiwan, but it has also used economic inducement, a different tool of economic statecraft on the opposite end of the spectrum of economic coercion to isolate Taiwan. So I think we need to counter that by also promoting economic cooperation, to counter Chinese economic inducement, and also work separately, but also with Taiwan to counter those effects. And I think the strengths, as mentioned by several panelists, the strength of Taiwan is in semiconductors, and it has tried to use it, I think, to project some influence, and it should be considered as an area. And I think there's a bit of hesitation because the EU is trying to become more independent with semiconductors, with its own CHIPS Act. And while it kind of is considering cooperating with Japan and South Korea, I think they're a bit more hesitant to name Taiwan as the partner. Correct me if I'm wrong here. And I think when the German economic minister last week turned down the deal of Global Wafers to purchase Siltronic, it was done without any explanation and without proposing and emphasizing other ways of cooperating with Taiwan and the Taiwanese semiconductor industry. And I think that could be that was maybe a missed opportunity. Yeah.
Mr. Ostrovicius, also, I think it was sometime last year when the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, was in Brussels. He said that he would relaunch, or it's one of the priorities of the Biden administration to relaunch a US-EU dialogue on China. Do you have hopes for this mechanism? What's your take on this?
Well, although I do support this dialogue, and which is so needed, I think this is critically important. I mean, both transatlantic partners, I mean, big transatlantic partners, EU and US and EU, have permanent exchange on this issue. Unfortunately, I cannot bring any good news from the EU side. I mean, So far, the European Union is more reluctant, to recognize China as a probably increasing challenger on the global scale, as well as in economic cooperation. And I have to admit that even seeing good examples, how can we prevent coercive and very interventionist like policies of China? The European Union is really late in responding. And I will bring you one example. So we have a decision in the European Union to have a strategic investment monitoring system. Each and every member state must have it. Well, the decision is made already for years ago. For the time being, if you look at the situation now, only 18 member states have fully functioning strategic investment from China monitoring system. 9 of the member states have not or have only partially. Knowing what is the level of penetration to our economies and how much of economic espionage and takeover of copyrights with no any redemption on to owners of that, I think we have to reassess what kind of the impact of this investments from China do on European scale. I do not necessarily afraid of each and every investment, but well, a lot of Chinese investments come to Europe through joint ventures. Acquiring a part of shares of capital in European companies, and those companies try to operate as European companies. Legally speaking, they are, but in essence, they represent Chinese economic interest, and we have to be somehow differently assessing the overall situation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also want to take the opportunity to address some of the questions that our audience have posed. And the 3 that were posed there, actually are directed more to Germany. One is asking that it is intolerable that Taiwanese politicians, while they were welcome to speak in Brussels, Prague, and Bratislava, was found undesirable in Germany. How to change this? And another one was why German politicians seems to be afraid of using the word Taiwan to their constituents and to their own media. I guess we wouldn't have the miracle answer of how to change that, but perhaps a connected question that ties these two a little bit together is whether you, and then perhaps you could answer that, Ms. Adachi, whether you witness a change in the attitudes in the public perception of the issue of Taiwan, or Mr. Austrevicius, maybe you also see that in the European greater public. Is there anything that you could add to that? Like, is there a change in the perception of the public of the Taiwan issue? I don't know who wants to perhaps go first.
I think there is but also there's so many other things on the list. So with regards to concerns of China, so I think Taiwan is does come on the list, but it's a long list of concerns, and I'm afraid that there's a lack of awareness and lack of know-how how to assess the situation, and it's very convoluted because there's a lack of a conversation about it.
Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that, Mr. Austrevicius? Is it also what you would say you can witness what the broader European public, if one can say such a thing, has think about the issue of Taiwan?
I think it will take time. It will take time, but so now we're facing a bit new political reality. Look, after those unfortunate changes in Hong Kong, we are having a new wave of political refugees. I mean, former legislators from Hong Kong, now, I mean, they are political refugees in Europe. And it will take time, I mean, for our political systems, for the civil society to understand, probably listening to the stories of those people. I mean, because I mean they are the best. I mean, to explain what really happened and how it happened in Hong Kong. So that's why I think we are getting to a bit new political situation, and I believe through this and more. I'm not speaking about, for example, those political activists in China who are facing very severe prosecution because of raising issues of, fundamental importance, human rights and labor rights and so on. And we will have those people more and more, not just Uyghurs, but more people in reaching out the West and telling their stories. So that's why I hope that even the German political system will be more accepting towards Taiwanese politicians who don't bring any risk, by the way. But, I mean, we know why, because China is really very carefully monitoring each and every visit, and they are so sensitively and harshly reacting, I mean, to those instances, teaching, I mean, presenting some threats probably, and so on. But, if we stand one by one, we will fail. I mean, if our response will be united and serious, I think we will give Beijing a clear message.
Yeah, thank you for stressing that again. We are nearing towards the end of our time for today. So perhaps let me ask my last question to you, Dr. Chen, and that is, if you could make a wish, what would that be concerning the future of EU-Taiwan relations?
That's a very interesting question. But if I may just take 1 minute to add to the previous question about how to change perceptions. I think specifically the person was asking about Germany. I really want to mention that Taiwan has one of the best ambassadors to Germany, Professor Xie. Because when I was a student, I was a fan of his, and I continue to read articles and writings of his, even though he is in Germany. So I read his experience of traveling through Germany, talking to even high school students, German people, about Taiwan and why Germany and Taiwan needs to work together and to promote the understanding of Taiwan, Taiwanese culture, Taiwanese history. So I agree that it takes time and it takes small steps, but if you add all the small steps together, we have we make large progress. So I think Taiwanese diplomats around the world are doing exactly that. And I think one of the important things that I also want to leave with our audience and those of you who are listening is that the PRC really wants not just the European Union, but countries around the world to believe that dealing with Taiwan and having a relationship with China has to be mutually exclusive. Either you deal with Taiwan or China gets angry. You deal with China, if you want to deal with the People's Republic of China, then you exclude Taiwan. It doesn't have to be this way. And I think information exchange and knowledge exchange will be one of the most beneficial things for Taiwan and democracy around the world. So my wish is really an opportunity for the European Union and Taiwan to really move forward, and for people not to be intimidated by authoritarian regimes, not just by the PRC, but elsewhere as well. So democracies could work together and actually for a better future.
Thank you very much. It reminded me of this old proverb that says, if you run alone, you run fast. If you run together, you come far. So thank you very much. I'd like to close this panel on this positive note. It was a very, very interesting debate. Thank you very much, Mr. Austrevicius. Thank you very much, Dr. Chen and Ms. Atic, for your input and your insights. Thanks to the presentation of Taipei, and to you, Professor Shi, for cooperating with us in this event. I learned a lot, and I also hope that you, our audience, enjoyed the discussion. And I'm sure that it's not the last time that we are talking about this topic and how China is exerting political and economic pressure also on the EU. And as a matter of fact, the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation is right now preparing a policy paper on this. So if you're interested, keep your eyes peeled for this publication, which will be published soon. So with that, I wish you all a nice afternoon, stay safe, and goodbye.
Thank you, Naumann.
Thank you.
婉一，谢谢，谢谢，哎，
谢谢大使，谢谢，拜拜。
Frau Hans, sehr gut, vielen Dank, Herr Frau Adachi, thank you very much.
Vielen Dank.
That was wonderful. Yes.